This is the Sovol SV04, and it is unique in Sovol's 3D printer lineup because it is an IDEX printer, IDEX, independent dual extruders. That means we have two extruders, two hot ends, completely separately. They move completely independently. And that means that you can print two of the same thing at the same time and get twice the output in the same amount of time. Or you can load up two different filaments and easily switch between them, even in the middle of a print. Want to print two colors? No need to change filament. Want to print water-soluble supports? So instead of having to cut your supports out, you just dunk your print in water and the supports dissolve away? Yeah, I'm excited to try this printer out. But before I try it out, I need to set it up. I haven't even plugged it in yet. And we're going to go through the whole process of setting this printer up, doing some test prints, getting it, finding all the quirks, and getting it printing right. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. Well, the first thing I got to do is plug the printer in and turn it on. And in order to do that, I have to make sure that the power supply is set to the right voltage. Sovol ships this printer set to 220, 240, whatever, the voltage that's used in most of the world. But here in the USA, we use 120 volts, and that means that if you don't make the change I'm about to show you, the printer will heat up really slowly. So I'm going to turn the printer around. The switch for the power supply is here on the side, but the thing I need to access is here on the back. Dumbass. Dumbass, of course. So I'm just going to go down here with my screwdriver and my flashlight and change it to 110. 115. Okay, it says 115. 110, 120, 115. It's all the same thing, right? The next thing Sovol has us do is level the X gantry. So one side could be slightly higher than the other. We got to fix that. So here on the printer, I'm going to hit Settings, Move, and let's just hit Home real quick and let the printer sort of auto home. It'll move the gantry down. It'll take a second, so I'll be back with you in just a minute. After the auto home completes, I'm going to take these two acrylic pieces, which Sovol has provided as sort of shims for this purpose. I'm going to move the Z-axis up one notch, and then I'm going to cut power. After that, I'm going to place the shim up against the vertical extrusion so that it's perfectly flush. And then I'm going to reach around here and manually turn the lead screw until the blue metal piece touches the shim. We're going to want to make sure it's just sort of touching and holding it in place. And I'm going to do that on both sides here. And you're going to want to be sure that the shim is touching this blue aluminum piece. It is not touching the roller wheel or any other part of this carriage, and that it is completely flush with the vertical extrusion. And when I've done that, now the X gantry is level. Having done that, we will now power back up again, and we'll hit Settings, Move, and we will just raise the Z axis and set these two shims aside. Now, it turns out that there is a better way to do all that stuff that I just showed you. There's a G-code command called G34, and it basically uses the BL touch sensor to automatically do what you just did manually. And the interesting thing is that the Sovol SV04 can support G34 in hardware, but the firmware that it's shipping with, at least as of the time I'm making this, doesn't support G34. So what I would suggest you do is make a new text file, just type G34 into it, and do File, Save As, and save it as G34.G-code. And I'm going to need to put that in quotes, or Windows will name it TXT, which is not what I want. And now here in my File Explorer, I have this file, G34.G-code. And you're going to put that on your SD card, and you're going to go to your printer, and you're going to print that as if it was a 3D print that you were trying to print. And if your printer starts moving the heads around and BL touching, and then your firmware supports G34, congratulations, you're done. And you can manually run this print anytime you want to make sure that your gantry is parallel with the bed. If your printer doesn't do anything when you print that G34 command, you may need to update your firmware. I have a copy of the firmware from Sovol that supports the G34 command. I'll put a link to it in the video description. And basically, you just put this firmware.bin file in the root folder of your SD card, power up the printer, and it'll automatically update its firmware, and you should be good to go. At this point, we have made the X gantry sort of square and parallel to the frame of the printer as a whole. A lot of people would say that we leveled it, but it doesn't really matter if it's level relative to like the earth. If this table was not quite level, the printer would still print fine. What matters is that it is all square and parallel to itself. So the next thing we're going to do, a lot of people would call leveling the bed, but the proper term, I'm told by machinists, is tramming. We're going to make sure that the bed is flat and square and parallel or perpendicular, depending on how you want to think of it, to the frame of the printer as a whole. We'll still say bed leveling because that's what everyone says, but you're not really leveling it like with a torpedo level. And in order to do this, we're going to take an ordinary sheet of printer paper, and let's just real quick home the printer because I've powered it on and off. And then we're going to insert that paper in between the nozzle and the bed. And we're going to raise and lower the nozzle, and we're going to kind of slide the paper back and forth until we can just barely feel the nozzle scraping and touching the paper. So I don't feel it at all, so I'm going to lower it down a little. Oh, there it is. There it is. I can just feel the roughness of the nozzle scraping as I move the paper back and forth. That's exactly what we want. Now that we've got the center spaced correctly, we're going to hit aux leveling, and we're going to do the same thing for the corners. I'm going to go to corner number 2 because I don't know, I like the front left. And for the corners, we're not going to use the touch screen to move the nozzle up and down, but we're going to turn these wheels here to raise and lower the bed. So I've got that just low enough that I can get the paper in, and then I'm going to slowly back it off until I can feel the paper scraping. And one thing to keep in mind here is that the bed is spring-loaded. So if I'm putting weight on it, even a little bit of weight, with my hand, it's going to push it down and it's going to affect the results. In addition, when I'm moving the springs, I don't want to be pushing down on the springs because you can see that makes them wobble. So I want to just carefully pinch and make sure I'm not applying any pressure as I'm measuring whether or not the paper is dragging. I'm going to repeat that step for each of the 4 corners. After you've gone around all 4 of the corners and gotten them 1 paper's width from the bed, I'd suggest going back to the first corner you did and just double check that it's still the same width from the bed, just scraping the paper. Sometimes as you adjust one of the other corners, the bed will sort of settle in a little bit and the distance of one of the corners you've already adjusted will change. You may need to go around 2 or even 3 times before it sort of stays the same and you come back to the first corner and it's still just how it needs to be. After you've done all that, we're going to go back to the very center and we're going to double check that that is correct as well. After we've done that, we're going to go back to the center and we're going to double check that it still is perfect as well, that it's just barely scraping. And in my case, it's not. And unfortunately, what you would think you would do at this point is go back to the main screen and readjust here to get it to scrape. But that's not going to work because that's going to lower the printer's Z offset so that then when we go back to the corners, they'll be too low and the paper will drag. There is no, what's happening is that the bed is not quite perfectly flat. You may not get this exact same result. The bed is slightly lower in the middle and slightly higher at the corner. So when we make the middle perfect, the corners are high. When we make the corners perfect, the middle is low. We do have a BL touch sensor in here which can compensate for this. So we're going to move ahead. After leveling the corners, we're going to come back to the center. If the center is not dragging, we're going to come back here and we're going to just adjust so it's dragging perfectly, and we're going to continue. Here in the aux leveling screen, we're going to switch now to extruder number 2, and we're going to adjust its height. And we're not going to do that through the menu. Rather, we're going to do that through this knob here. The sole purpose of this knob is to adjust the height of extruder 2 so it matches that of extruder 1. All right, so now we're going to hit 1 for the center, and it's going to move to the center, and we should have a perfect scrape. Well, we're pretty close. So I'm going to raise and lower extruder number 2 with this knob until we get the same scrapey, perfect little feeling that we got with extruder number 1. And we can double check that by switching back to extruder number 1 and make sure it's the same. Now that we've got the printer basically leveled out, everything is sort of mostly flat and square to itself, the next thing to do is to let the printer build a mesh of that topology of the bed. And we're going to do that here in the leveling menu by just hitting measuring. And what it's going to do is it's going to go to a series of points. It looks like it's 16 points on the bed. It's going to use that BL Touch probe to measure the height of the bed. You see, the bed is not perfectly flat. It's got some sort of dips and valleys, even like little microscopic ones, that can affect the quality of the print. So by building this mesh, it can compensate for that when it's printing. When that's done, you'll see a matrix of numbers here, and if you know how to read them, you can actually use that to tell which parts of your bed are high and which parts of your bed are low. You can see it right here. The front left corner is 0.4 millimeters higher than around the center, which is consistent with what I experienced when I was trying to level the corners. Now that the printer knows this information, it can automatically compensate for this while printing. In fact, we're basically ready to print as soon as we load the filament. And the first thing I'm going to do is hit temp and hotbed, and I'm going to start the bed preheating. And I don't, what's a good temperature for PLA? Let's just say 60 degrees. Okay, and we can see right here that it's indicating that it is heating to 60 degrees. If you need to know the temperatures, it depends on what filament you're using, and you can always look. Oftentimes, it'll be printed on the roll of filament, although these sample filaments, which were provided by Sovol, don't seem to have that information anywhere on them, but it's PLA. There's information about optimal temps for PLA all over their place on the internet. We're also going to begin nozzle 1 preheating, and here we do have a preset for PLA, so let's just hit PLA here, and that's going to begin it heating to 200, and nozzle 2 we will also begin preheating for PLA. Nozzle 2, PLA. Okay, great. Now they are both preheating to 200 degrees. In order to load the filament, I'm just going to unspool the end here. When you're working with filament, it's very, very important not to let the end sort of hang loose, because it could like wrap under itself and jam when you're printing. This almost never happens from the factory, but it can happen if you let it loose. That's why they tuck the end there. I need a cutter, hold on. Like basically every 3D printer in the world, it comes with some accessories, including a cutter and other such things. So we will put that up here. We will feed this through the filament runout sensor. It also helps to cut this at a 45-degree angle instead of a 90-degree angle. It helps it feed through better. This is always the problem I have with filament runout sensors, is it doesn't want to flippant feed through. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to cut a little piece of filament, and we're going to jam it in there, and then it will not, we won't have a filament runout sensor, but who cares? Are we up to temp? Yeah, we're up to temp. Once this is up to temp, I'm going to insert this into the hole on the extruder and feed it down in. Feel it, there we go. Feel a little bit of resistance, but then it feeds in. And I can even start to push it through, and it will extrude out a little bit. Next, I'm going to insert the SD card. Kudos to Sovol for using a full-size SD card instead of a micro SD. That's pretty cool. And I'm going to go ahead and print. When I hit print, I'll see the list of files that are on the SD card, and notice that they have prefixes. Some of them are prefixed mirror, some are prefixed dual. The printing mode that you use depends on how the file is sliced. If you try and print a file that is sliced for single printing using dual, it may not work. So let's take a look at the printing modes. There's single mode, which prints with one of the two extruders. So you could have two different filaments loaded up, and you could print TPU one day and PLA the next day without ever having to switch filaments, just by choosing which extruder you use to print. There's dual mode, which uses both extruders on the same print. So you would use that if you were doing like dual color prints or dissolvable supports. There's duplicate mode, which prints two of the same thing, two identical things, and there's mirror mode, which prints two things, just one mirrored left to right. So let's just print the XYZ calibration cube. That's always a good first print. We'll put this in mirror mode, and we'll go to print mirror XYZ cube, go. Are you sure you want to start printing in mirror mode? Yes. The nozzles will heat up, and it'll begin to print, and we'll see how it does. Now I can see as it's laying down its first layer that the Z height is still a little too high, so I'm going to hit adjust, and I'm going to nudge that down a little bit. How to know whether your Z height is too high or too low is a topic for another video. I'll put a link in the video description to a great web page actually that tells you what to look for to judge whether your Z height is okay or not. I think what I'm going to actually do is bump that down until it starts to look right, and then I will restart the print. And after running for a little while, the printer produces these two calibration cubes. Two 20mm cubes, one white, one blue. 2 cubes in the same amount of time as it would have taken another printer to produce one. And that's fine. But there is a more complicated trick that we can ask the printer to perform, and that is dual extruder print, a print that combines the two colors into one print. And you can see here why that's a more complicated trick, because the printer has done a fine job of laying down these layers, but the layers are not aligned correctly. You can see that the blue layer is slightly to the right and above the left layer where they should be butted right up against each other. And that is the next thing we need to fix in setting up this printer. There's a parameter called the offset, which is the relative position of the two nozzles, so that the printer can, when it wants to put a white and a blue line right next to each other, it can actually accomplish that. The answer is that there is a test print we can print, so we'll go print. Oh, first of all, we'll make sure we're in dual mode, and then we will print, and the test print we're looking for is calibration. So we're going to print this calibration print in dual mode. Once the print is done, there's going to be a horizontal and a vertical set of combs, if you will, each one printed by one of the two extruders. And when everything is perfectly correct, those two combs will perfectly line up. The teeth will be perfectly lined up with each other. If the offset is incorrect, the combs will be offset, and the amount by which they're offset will tell you how much you need to adjust. One of the things I want you to see is that the center tooth of each of the combs has a little bit of an extra rectangle printed on it to help you know which one is which, and those are the ones that we're going to measure, the offset between those center combs. Now that you know how far off the offset is, you also need to know the sign, positive or negative. One of them is to the left and one of them is to the right. Sovol has documentation about this on the SD card, but the relevant screen is here, which shows whether you want positive or negative depending on which way you need to move the comb. Now that I've measured my numbers, I'll put them into the printer by hitting Settings, Set Hot End Offset, and I can insert them here. I need to go plus 3.29 on the X or horizontal axis. All right. And on the y-axis, we're going to go plus 3.34. Well, after, let's not say how many iterations and how much time I've been sitting here answering emails while letting this print and checking it and tweaking it. After quite a lot of tweaking, I've got it relatively dialed in. Suffice it to say that measuring with a ruler only gets you vaguely in the ballpark. And then you just have to go, I need to nudge it a little to the left. I need to nudge it a little to the up or down. And you just keep nudging it until it looks like it's dead on. At this point, I would love to say that I'm done. Like we've done all of the steps and now we should be ready to print. But I can see from the way these layers are going down that a little more tweaking needs to happen. One of the things I can see is that the nozzle height is not the same between the extruder number 1 and extruder number 2. And again, there's a link in the video description to what it looks like when the nozzle is too high versus too low. But suffice it to say, the lines don't look the same. It's always the case that when you're setting up a 3D printer, you do the paper scrape method, but then that only gets you in the ballpark. And then you look at how the first layer is going down and you tweak the layer height. Based on how the filament is actually behaving. And that's just as true here with this SV04 with its 2 extruders as it is on a printer with 1. What I found myself doing was, as the very first layer was going down, just tweaking this knob just a little bit to raise or lower the nozzle and adjust how the one line looks relative to the other line so the two lines look the same. So just a little tip there. One more thing you're going to need to do in order to use the SV04 is install the Slicer software. Slicer is a piece of software that is used to prepare a 3D printing file for printing by a specific 3D printer. If you want a full tutorial on what a slicer is and how to use it, I've got that video and I'll link it down in the video description. But suffice it to say, this is the SD card that comes with the SV04. This is the folder, and in it is this installer. And yes, it is a Windows installer only, so I guess if you run Mac OS or Linux, I hope you have an emulator, or you could always just download Cura. Cura is the piece of software that they're using, and Cura is open source, and Sovol have customized it to include their specific printers. Everything that is here could be set up manually in the standard open source version of Cura, but it would be a little bit tedious to do. Here we've got Sovol 3D Cura. It's installed. And what you're going to need to do is import all the machines. So here in Settings, Printer, we're going to do Add Printer. And you'll see here they've got several different versions of the SV04 depending on what mode that it's going to be printing in. We'll talk about that more in a second. But for now, I'm just going to import each of these machines. Settings, Printer, add printer. I can't use my mouse today. Dual mode. I got copy mode. Here comes dual mode. So let's just talk about what the difference is between these printers, because obviously we only have one printer. So what's going on here? What you'll see is that in single mode 1 and single mode 2, those are going to be used for printing with extruder number 1 or extruder number 2. And the only thing that changes there is which extruder the slicer tells the printer to use when it prints. So if we had PLA on extruder 1 and TPU on extruder 2, we would just select one of these two machines based on which filament we wanted to use. When we go to copy, dual, or mirror mode, what you're going to see is that the size of the print bed shrinks to half what it actually is. And the reason for that is that one extruder is going to be printing here on the left side of the bed, and the other extruder is going to be printing over on the other side of the bed, and they don't want you to put something over there and have it sort of overlap and interfere. So that is the difference between I see. I'm sorry. Dual mode. In dual mode, you're printing with both extruders at the same time. And single mode 1 and 2, you're printing with one or the other. So sorry, dual mode also gives you the full bed. You can see that if I choose dual mode, I can just put something on the other side of the bed and just stay on this side of the line, and it will work, but there may be some other complications there. And that is going to bring us to the end of this video about setting up the Sovol SV04, which is going to leave some people going, wait, aren't there a lot more steps to getting a great 3D print out of the printer? And you're right, there are. What I wanted to do in this video is get you through the unique parts of the Sovol SV04 specifically, so that you can then begin the process of calibrating the printer for your filament and your specific needs, which is going to be unique to each individual person. I am going to put a link in the video description below to a great webpage by Teaching Tech, who is a YouTube channel who specializes in 3D printing, and he has a whole like 10-step calibration process to help you get the best results out of any printer. And that's what I use when I've got a new printer and a new filament and I want to try to get the best results from it. But we're not going to go through that in this video because this video is already long enough. If at this point you do have any questions about what's in the video, you're welcome to leave a comment down below. I try to answer all the questions that I get in my comments. Sometimes YouTube doesn't show me the comments, in which case you're more than welcome to email me at the email address associated with my YouTube channel, or message me on Facebook, although sometimes Facebook puts the messages in spam and I don't see them. So email is really the best way to get a hold of me. I try to help everybody who reaches out, and I'm more than happy to try to do that if you have if anything about this video wasn't clear. Thanks so much for watching. Happy flying. Happy 3D printing. That's my sign off, but it's usually for FPV videos. What are you doing in here? The least you could do is subscribe or join my Patreon, or like just here's another video I picked out for you. Jeez.